Thank you for coming to our program this evening. It's Your Chance, Volunteering During the Pandemic and Beyond. This is part of our Community Read 2020 that we've been sponsoring, along with our neighboring libraries, the Thomas Memorial Library in Cape Elizabeth and the South Portland Public Library. We've had a really great couple of months of programs centered around the book, This is Chance, that was about the Alaskan earthquake and just brought in many different kinds of programs related to disasters and volunteerism and just talking about the book as well. So this is one of our final programs that we're having. So thank you for joining us tonight. We are doing this Zoom program in webinar mode so that you will see the panelists, but not each other. And as you want to ask questions during the program, please use the chat feature of Zoom, and we will pass your questions on to the panelists. Lucy Norvell is our coordinator of programming and development and communications, and she's going to introduce our panelists this evening. Lucy?
Welcome, everybody. We're really glad to have you, and we have a really nice turnout for tonight's program. We've got four extremely knowledgeable panelists tonight to talk about how volunteering has changed since March, and also about some specific local volunteer opportunities. Volunteers are so important, and they play an integral role in community resilience and in helping nonprofit organizations meet our missions. We dearly love the volunteers that we have at the Scarborough Public Library. So I'd like to introduce the four panelists to you, and then each of them will speak briefly about their specific areas of expertise. And then we'll open it up and can answer some of your questions. So we've got Michael Ashmore, who's the Program Development and Training Officer with Volunteer Maine. Karen Stephenson, who's Director of Volunteer Engagement at the United Way of Greater Portland. Mary Hadlock, who's the RSVP Volunteer Services Director at the Southern Maine Agency on Aging. And Cindy Williams, who's the Phone Pal Project Manager, also with the Southern Maine Agency on Aging. So first, Michael's going to talk, and a little bit about Michael. He joined Volunteer Maine in 2010 as the Program Development and Training Officer. He's responsible for outreach and pre-application training for organizations interested in using national service as a solution. And he's also responsible for providing training to funded agencies and organizations interested in increasing their capacity to utilize the power of volunteer service. Michael started with the commission as a grants officer. He was doing that work for 6 years. But he's also been a nonprofit director and a school district administrator, and he brings experience guiding volunteers as a one-time director and coordinator of volunteers for the Names Project Maine, the AIDS Memorial Quilt. So welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. As announced, I work with Volunteer Maine, which is the state service commission here in Maine. We're one of 53 state service commissions around the country. Yeah, there's more than there are states because Puerto Rico has one, and DC has one, and actually the Northern Marianas Islands has a state service commission as well. And what do state service commissions do? Well, we're the wholesaler of retail services to organizations that use volunteers. So we fund programs, as mentioned, national service in particular, AmeriCorps and other national service programs. And we also train agencies and individuals as managers of volunteers. We raise awareness of issues in the volunteer sector, and we promote service as a strategy, which I believe is how I end up getting invited to opportunities like this, because service is a remarkable strategy. We don't have data from 2019 because of the interruption of COVID-19, but data from the year before indicates that 1 in 3 adults in the United States volunteers through an organization. And that's an increase over previous years, a pretty significant one. Interestingly, volunteerism sort of waxes and wanes with economic prosperity. We find that more individuals actually volunteer when the economy is struggling. And that's a good thing because volunteerism helps knit communities together and does provide that community resiliency, which is really important. Volunteers are very invested in their community. Volunteers in general, the research indicates, do something good for their neighborhoods at 3 times the rate of people that don't volunteer. And they're twice as likely to help their neighbors. And they also are more likely to belong to civic organizations or associations, and they do that at 5 times the rate of non-volunteers. So volunteerism builds vibrant communities. And another thing that research shows is that those community interconnections that volunteerism helps create are absolutely critical during times of emergency or crisis. Or towns or cities or communities that have a really high rate of social cohesion come back from disasters much more quickly than communities where that's lacking. And so that's one of the reasons why volunteerism is such a critical element in community resiliency. It helps deliver really important community services. It helps give volunteers themselves give voice to disadvantaged individuals that are served. And they also provide and promote economic well-being, especially in remote and rural communities. Maine is actually better at volunteering than most other states. We're 10th in the nation in volunteerism, with almost 40% of Maine residents volunteering with some organized program. And it's not a huge amount of time. Mainers on average donate about 35 hours a year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it actually gets us to 10th in the nation. So that's a pretty good statistic. Volunteers care about and improve their communities, and they're really active when it comes to helping out in times of need. And that's certainly shown up this spring. Maine nonprofits, which are the primary user of volunteers, are really small. Maine has some of the smallest nonprofits in the country. We have about 8,500 nonprofits in the state, of which about 5,500 are what we'd consider public charities or 501c3 organizations. 77% of those organizations have budgets under 100,000. And actually 62% are so small that they don't actually have to file financial reporting, which means they have budgets under 50,000. So that's more than, or almost 2/3 of Maine's nonprofits depend almost entirely on volunteerism to operate. They have 1 or maybe 2 staff members at best, and then the rest of their services are delivered by volunteers. And that's an absolutely critical element to dealing with our current situation. Interestingly, when we look at Maine nonprofits, about 45% of Maine nonprofits are actually somehow related to health and provision of healthcare services. And then 6 out of 10, 60% are in that health related area. And another quarter are social service organizations. And as you might guess, during times of emergency like COVID, those organizations are called upon to continue to deliver services. When we have large unemployment or when we have great needs in our healthcare infrastructure, it's volunteers that help fill in those gaps. And that's actually fairly important to Maine's economy overall. Nonprofits contribute about $12.5 billion to Maine's economy and employ almost 85,000 people. But volunteerism itself, just the value of donated services to that nonprofit community, is almost $1 billion worth of economic activity. And we expect to actually see that increase during the COVID crisis. One of the things that we do at Volunteer Maine is we partner with Maine Emergency Management Agency and co-chair what's called the Donations Coordinations Team. And it's part of Maine's plan for dealing with disasters. And what the commission's role is to help deal with unsolicited donations, but also more importantly, to help organize volunteers who have an interest in providing service during times of trouble, disaster, health emergencies. And so one of the platforms that we use is an online volunteering site where people who are interested in volunteering during times of disaster can pre-register and affiliate with organizations, and then over time become trained, become connected to those organizations, and then when called upon can help out with delivery of services that are needed in a crisis. It's a platform called Maine Ready. It's easy to find. You can just Google Maine Ready and it'll pop right up. And it's very familiar to many volunteers in Maine because it uses a similar platform, the same software as the volunteering platform that the United Ways of Maine sponsor and use across the state to connect volunteers to volunteer opportunities. It's a different system. And it has different questions because it's disaster specific, but it's an opportunity that the population or the public in Maine has to pre-affiliate so that you don't end up wanting to volunteer and not have an organization to connect to. One of the big challenges in disaster volunteering is that people show up without being connected to an organization that can help provide an umbrella of liability insurance and training and a direction towards needed services. Maine's volunteers, like our population, are older. COVID has been had significant impact on many volunteer services that are provided by folks that are baby boomers or in their 50s and older. They're at a higher risk because of COVID, and because of that, we're unable to provide some of those essential services. And so there was earlier in the spring a significant transitional need where younger volunteers needed to fill roles that were being vacated by older volunteers. And one of the great things is there's actually pretty good evidence that despite a lot of conversation about generational differences in volunteering, Generation X folks who are in their 40s to 50s volunteer at the highest rate, actually above what boomers do, who are the second highest. But millennials, a much larger slice of the population, actually volunteer at a pretty significant rate as well, and are interested and have a very strong sense of altruism and a high interest in volunteerism as a group. So, that's all good for Maine. And our other panelists are going to be able to share some actual individual experiences. I volunteer, and I encourage other folks to do it too. And I go back to that key fact that volunteerism builds connections. And in a society where there's a certain amount of fracturing and lots of political challenges, being alongside someone helping others is one of the great ways to build connection and to build trust and faith in one another and in our society. So the facts are there. It's a healthy thing for communities, and just want to encourage everyone to jump in. And as I said, I'm happy to take any questions when the time comes, but I'm going to surrender the stage now, and I think Karen's next.
Thank you, Michael. Next is Karen Stephenson, and Karen's the Director of Volunteer Engagement with United Way of Greater Portland. And in that role, she ensures there are a variety of opportunities for people to volunteer to reach our community's goals, no matter how much time they have to give. And often this is through helping organizations identify opportunities for team projects. But also through days of service, internal opportunities, and developing projects in collaboration with the many community partners of United Way. That's what Karen specializes in and focuses on. So we're happy to have you on the panel, Karen.
Thanks. Thanks, Lucy. And thanks for having me here tonight. I'm excited that there's such a good group here. And I know that there's been a lot going on with the library that's been really interesting leading up to this. So thanks. So as Lucy mentioned, my job is really to mobilize volunteers to address community issues. And prior to COVID, I did do a lot of that through days of service and recruiting people to read in classrooms, in different one-day opportunities, but then also some ongoing opportunities. Many of you might be familiar with our Community Day of Action, which is in the spring, or Day of Caring, and maybe even participated in it. That's probably our biggest one that we do. And then a lot of my time is really spent with our corporate and community partners, corporate partners who would reach out and say, we have a group that wanted to do some team building. Can you help connect us with an organization that can do that? So a lot of my time was spent doing that. There would be, particularly during our campaign, which is in the fall, we would often have companies that wanted to make the connection between the work that they're doing, volunteering, and then the community organization that they're supporting, and the fundraising that we do as our annual campaign. And also the last few years, we've been focused on Thrive 2027, which is the community's 3 10-year goals, and that's been something that United Way has focused all of our efforts and resources on. So those goals are to give kids a strong start, to empower the neighbors to thrive, not just survive, and then also to help us live longer, better. So then with all of that happening, a lot of that stuff is together. It's group opportunities. It's getting people together. Like Michael said, like it's pulling people together and volunteering side by side. And then COVID hit. So that turned things, I feel like a lot of sentences are start with, and then COVID, and then all the stuff happens. But everything changed with volunteering. So not only were people trying to figure out their own personal lives, their work lives changed drastically. Many of the volunteer projects that we had planned and scheduled came to a halt. It were postponed or finally canceled. And it was just difficult to try and figure out what the need was, because things were changing so rapidly. And many of the people that I would normally reach out to, which would, the corporate partners, they were trying to figure out what are they doing with their own employees. The nonprofit partners that I might normally deal with were, again, trying to figure things out. They also had to pivot and figure out how to change what their opportunities were, what their needs were. Like Michael said, a lot of them lost some of their regular volunteers, just not lost them, but they couldn't do their typical job because they were immune compromised or they were older, which was the target of the population that we were most saying could not be together in a group. So people were just trying to really react to things. So they weren't really allowed to do a lot of the projects that I was used to having them participate in. So there was a lot of quick webinar watching and sharing of different we have a big network across the United States and the world with United Way. So there was a lot of sharing of what's going on here. Here are some, things that we've done, and trying to change them out, trying to change the projects that might fit a little bit more locally. So things like what we would normally even do as simple as like an inspiration card, we do that a lot for people. It seemed really great and what an easy thing to do. But at the beginning, we weren't sure how long the virus stayed on something physical. So we couldn't do it physically. We couldn't, have people do those and then give them to people. So we figured out a way to do them online. And many of the nonprofits were trying to keep their staff engaged. So when their volunteers weren't able to come, they did keep their staff on to do some of the projects where we might normally fill in with a volunteer, or they might reach out to me to request help recruiting volunteers. Again, the companies were just trying to get their employees settled and trying to figure out what best to do, but they were not allowing their volunteers to do anything in person. So a lot of the organizations across the states were doing things like online reading and online mentoring, and just kind of changing their regular volunteer opportunities to, meet the virtual world. So they might do it something like this. And then there are also cases where that didn't work because, the teachers were stressed and they were trying to figure out, well, how do we do our classrooms online? We don't actually have time to bring a new volunteer in to read. So we don't have time to do that at this point. So we think it's a great idea, but we can't do it. Or now that you are online and you're in a Zoom room, then there's all different kinds of things for mentoring and having people in the same room with kids, and challenges and making sure that there's, confidentiality. And so there just was a lot that people had to, kind of, I hate the word pivot, but I'm going to use it. They had to pivot and change things. So I worked with one of my responsibilities is to facilitate a group called PAVA, which stands for Portland Area Volunteer Administrators. And that's a group of people that have responsibility for volunteers within their nonprofit, either their nonprofit or their school. And so we met almost weekly, just to kind of say, like, what's going on with you and what resources have you found and how have you changed your current work, and how, what do you have some ideas on? Here's a challenge that I have. Do you have some ideas on how I might change that? And even just at the beginning, it was really just to kind of, you're stressed about that, I'm stressed about that too. Like some of that, we didn't quite have an answer for things, but we were at least, knowing that we were all kind of in it together and coming up with some of these, some of the answers to some questions. So that was a lot of it. And like I said, I attended a lot of webinars and presentations just to figure out some things. But as an organization, United Way responded pretty much right away with what we do best, which is fundraising. So we reached out immediately to our corporate partners and the community and had amazing response with both funds that we did. We did a large one to respond to COVID-19, and then we also did a follow-up one about the racial equity. We did a racial equity fund. So we're really fortunate in that a lot of our internal volunteer opportunities also are committees. So that lended itself pretty easily to do a Zoom call or something like that. So that work could continue on. Same with our board meetings. We were also already set up to work from home, so we didn't have as much of a quick turnaround for that. We had been working on that for several months leading up to this. We did have a little bit of a learning curve on how to use Zoom a little bit effectively, which I was quite proud of, that I got my logo up on the back, which is a new thing for me. And then we continued on with, I do a monthly newsletter. It's a volunteer engagement newsletter, and it lists opportunities. And at this point, at the beginning of it, it really kind of switched from an opportunity for volunteer things, because there weren't really that many of them at the beginning, but it became a great opportunity to post resources. So we had a pretty good mailing list that we could get some of those resources out. And then when we did have partners that were looking for volunteers and needed some help with that, we could include that on there as well. The other thing that we have, which Michael had alluded to, is Volunteer Me Greater Portland, which is an online listing, and it's the countywide of opportunities that are coming up. And we did a special page for COVID related opportunities on that, so that people could find that pretty quickly. So it did take us a little while to kind of get up and running and get things going and get some opportunities out there for people. But we do have a pretty good list of those opportunities. Some of them, again, they're all virtual, although we did have, I had a group last week that did a picnic table build, which was kind of funny because they were spread out across the whole parking lot, building picnic tables for one of our partners, so that the kids that attend their after school program had a place to sit and do some of their outdoor learning. Prior to that, they were, either sitting in the parking lot or sitting in the grass. So they were really hoping that they could have some sort of space where the kids could spread out and actually have some of their learning on there. So that was my first in-person volunteer opportunity since March. So it was very exciting. But we do have opportunities, like for all of the funds that we did. We had volunteers that looked at all of the applications for those funds, and they made the decisions for who got the funding, or who got the funding requests for those. So a lot of that was already in place, like I said, that through committee So it was just easy to that just kind of translated very easily onto a Zoom call or a Teams call. And then we also have started doing a series for people who are looking for jobs. So we partnered with a corporate partner of ours, Prudential, and we offered a couple of weeks ago, we offered a resume and LinkedIn webinar. So attendees they got an overview of the webinar, just kind of talking about what a resume is, why it's important, how things might have changed if you haven't looked for a job in a while. Here are some things that you should include or some ways that you could set it up. And then they also talked about LinkedIn, the importance of LinkedIn, how to set up a profile on there. But then after that, they had the opportunity to then set up a one-on-one session with a volunteer who could sit down and really look through your resume to give some tips on that and some ideas on how to, what you might include in your resume, how you might word some things. Same with LinkedIn, the one-on-one, they would help you develop a LinkedIn profile if you didn't have it, or help with different aspects of the profile. And then this coming week, we have a follow-up to that, which is going to talk about interviews. So they'll talk about the importance of an interview, how things have changed because of interviewing on Zoom now, some tips and ideas on that, and then also the importance of informational interviewing versus your actual interview for a job. And then at the end of that, they'll have an opportunity to work with some volunteers one-on-one to practice some interviewing online. So we have some good opportunities that are coming up, and we're continually trying to do those with our partners as they come along. If you're familiar with our CASH program, we're talking about how to make all of that virtual too, and different aspects of that. And that's the free tax prep. But then there's also some follow-up that will go along with that. So we've kind of pivoted a lot to getting people to use their skills with their volunteering, where they can't do a lot of the hands-on things. But the other thing that we have done is we've also reached out. We've had a lot of requests from partners, our nonprofit partners, for masks. So we have an ongoing mask making project. Some of the schools have reached out and they wanted, because they still are doing some outdoor learning and it's not getting any warmer, they've asked for fleece neck warmers for kids. So I have an opportunity for people to sew neck warmers for that. So there are a lot of things that are out there that are still happening. But yeah, it's just a little bit different now. And then, and like I said, going forward, we'll have more as those. So, and if you are interested, I don't know if Nancy put it in there, volunteer, but yeah, you did, never mind. I was gonna give you the website for the Volunteer Me Greater Portland. So, and if you wanted to sign up for the newsletter, you can also do that on the United Way website as well. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. Really, really nice overview of the United Way of Greater Portland's work. And our third panelist who's ready to speak is Mary Hadlock. And Mary's with the RSVP, she's a RSVP Volunteer Services Director at SMAA, the Southern Maine Agency on Aging. Mary's a licensed social worker with more than 12 years of experience working together with volunteers. And in addition to her agency-wide volunteer management position, she leads effective efforts to establish shared leadership responsibility for highly skilled volunteers who take on more advanced roles and improve efficiencies of programs. And actually our next panelist, Cindy Williams, is that kind of a talented key volunteer. So Mary, we'd love to hear what's happening at the Southern Maine Agency on Aging.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for the invitation. I was excited to receive this, actually honored to be invited to be on this panel today. And I actually have had the privilege of working alongside Karen and Michael. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you. So I'd like to kind of give you a brief overview of our agency for those that may not be familiar with it, and then talk a little bit about volunteer services, and then get a little bit more in depth about current opportunities that we have available for volunteers. So just as an overview, many of you in the audience may already be volunteers with Southern Maine Agency on Aging. So first I'd like to thank you if you are, and certainly if you're not, and at the end of this are interested, then please feel free to reach out to us. So I've been with Southern Maine Agency on Aging since 2008, and our mission here at the agency is to improve the life of older adults with disabilities, and the caregivers. And so that's certainly something that we cannot do, our programs and services, without the assistance of our volunteers. So we rely very heavily on our volunteers. Our agency's been here since 1972. We are primarily, one of the funding sources is through the Older Americans Act. Many of you are familiar with the Meals on Wheels program, and that's one of the mandates that we are required to offer under the Older Americans Act, and that's just one of the programs. So within our agency, we have different departments. I oversee volunteer services. We receive the majority of our funding through the Corporation for National and Community Services. RSVP is just one of the 3 programs under the newly branded AmeriCorps Seniors, previously Senior Corps. The other 2 sister programs that we have are Foster Grandparents, Senior Companions, and in addition to that, there's, well, maybe that's it, Foster Grandparents, Senior Companions, that would be the 3 of them. And so other than that, we also have been privileged to receive a volunteer generation grant, generation fund grant through Volunteer Maine, which has allowed us to be able to reach out to communities and to build upon the needs that they have to help grow volunteer opportunities to meet their needs. I said that all backwards, but anyway. We currently have approximately 699 volunteers on our volunteer roll. I just checked that in my database before I came on. Many of these, or some of these volunteers, have not been able to continue during this challenging period. However, we have been able to transition many of our programs to a different platform. So for example, in addition to our Meals on Wheels, volunteers that are out there, we created what we called AVERT is the acronym. So it was a volunteer emergency response team. And so we implemented this just prior to COVID, and received an incredible response. I can attest to what Michael talked about earlier from the community. We received over 300 new inquiries from potential volunteers, mainly wanting to help to deliver meals. So we had to certainly worked with the Maine CDC on how we could be able to utilize our volunteers and to continue to deliver these meals safely and without interruption to our clients. And I'm proud to say that we were able to do that. Certainly some volunteers, due to COVID, felt uncomfortable. We do a handoff. The meals are dropped at the client's doors. And so there's no interaction, and our volunteers have the equipment that they need to the precautions that they need to be able to do this safely. In addition to that, our Medicare volunteers transitioned to how they went from offering face-to-face in-person counseling appointments to offering appointments via the phone and also via Zoom. And then in addition to that, we also had our Age Well programs, many of which we were not able to continue offering, but we have been able to have volunteers come in and teach some gentle exercise and yoga classes via Zoom now. And also they got out a weekly newsletter with ideas or coffee hours, and able to offer that also into the community. Some of the newer programs, in addition to our AVERT team that we're able to implement under our Volunteer Generation Fund grant, was our Tech Pal program. And this is a very new program that we're piloting. We received another grant from Maine Community Foundation, which has allowed us to get tablets into the hands of some of our clients that we're working with. And then we're training volunteers, all done virtually, to be able to mentor or tutor these clients on how to use the tablets. Not without its challenges, but we're certainly looking at ways in the future and trying to be innovative in the way that we engage our volunteers and keep them active during this time. Another way that we have been able to do this is through our Phone Pal program, and I'll introduce Cindy in a second to talk more on this. But our Phone Pal program started about 2 years ago, and we had reduced the number of days that we were delivering meals to clients. We went from 5 to 3 to 2. And we thought that, we really would be a great idea to find a way to be able to still reach out to these clients during the days that we're not delivering. And so the Phone Pal program was implemented. And this program, I'm proud to say, when we talk about skilled volunteers, has always had a volunteer coordinator that basically has developed this program into the program that it is today. And so what these Phone Pals do is that it strictly works with our Meals on Wheels clients, and they're able to social call with these clients, but just to be able to check in a friendly voice, and I'll leave the rest to Cindy to discuss that. Trying to think of other things that I might have missed. Well, I can just go on and talk more, but these are just some of the opportunities that we have available right now. We're still currently ramping up for another AVERT team to be ready in case there is another stay-at-home order, and we want to continue to be able to meet the needs of our clients and get the meals out there. So we're looking at that. I get inquiries on a regular basis. In addition, we're still looking for Tech Pal volunteers and Phone Pals, which is more than doubled the number that we had for participants in this program. And so I don't want to take too much away from Cindy, but I can turn it over to Cindy, and then if you have any questions about these or other opportunities, please feel free to reach out to us. And I should also say that in addition to the programs that we have here within the agency, we also work with other organizations outside of our agency. We call them stations. And with them, many of them have also been able to transition to a virtual platform or done their volunteering via the phone. So. But I'd like Cindy to give you some real insight into the Phone Pal program.
Hey there. Am I on?
You are. We can hear you.
This is good. As you can see, my name is Cindy Williams. Basically, my daughter got me into this. She saw one of the ads somewhere regarding what Southern Maine Agency on Aging was doing, this positive program called Phone Pals. So I got a call from my daughter one day, and she said, "Hey, Mom, you like to talk." And that's what started it. And I have to tell you, I am so pleased that she did that and what has happened since then. The Phone Pal program, it's I feel perfect for what our nation is going through right now, because literally what the program is we have volunteers who go through special training and background checks, etc., who literally just want to reach out to seniors who are primarily homebound, and be good listeners. And how it works is we obviously have a virtual training right now. It's something that is online, and we are manager of the program. He puts it all together, and they learn about the do's and don'ts and proper conversations, etc. So when they enter this program, as I did, there's a very strong feeling of, I've got this. There's nothing that's a problem here. And from there, my job is to basically match them up with our Meals on Wheels recipients who would like to receive 1 or 2 calls a week, just somebody they've never met. There's no past history, no complications to the conversations. And what I try to do is I try to match people up who have similar interests. So I get the interest from our phone pals, and then we've got a couple of more awesome volunteers who, as people join the Meals on Wheels program, they reach out to them and introduce the program. And I get a list of people who think they might be interested, which is great. And then as I explain the program to them, I get their interest and match them up so that those first calls are not awkward, and then it just seems to fly from there. So what we ask of our volunteers is simply the ability to reach out once or twice a week for a 15-20-minute chat with their pal. I call our Meals on Wheels recipients clients, which is a little awkward, but anyway, the program puts the clients in the driver's seat. They decide what days of the week that are good for them to receive a call. They decide what time of day, and it just goes from there. And what we have found is that, as Mary mentioned, through this not so good period in our history, this has reached out to the need, and the program has more than doubled, and I see it zooming from there. It's just great. Very appreciative of our volunteers, and I think it is something that is going to go further and do more, let's put it that way. And can you tell I made no prep for this and no notes, so yeah, it's a win-win. And that's what's made me, oh, and by the way, after my daughter said, hey mom, you like to talk, and that's what got me into it, of course, then I talked enough so that I got asked to manage the program. But it's nothing that I have ever felt like, oh, why did I do this? Because you call up our clients afterwards and say, how's the chatting going? And they say, oh, I love it. It's so great when he calls. It's so great when she calls. So we appreciate all of our volunteers hugely and would love to have more of you on board.
Cindy, congratulations for your leadership of the program. It's gone through the roof, I know, and you still need more volunteers. But it's really important to have the voice of a key volunteer on this panel. I mean, Michael kicked things off by telling us that we have something to be very proud of here in Maine, the top 10 state in the country in terms of our volunteerism, and it's also exciting to hear from all of you that there are still ways to get involved. There are many ways to get involved. So thank you all for telling us specifically about what each of your organizations is doing. And we are starting to get some questions, and we want to make sure that we invite other questions. But Deb had a question that is definitely for you, Mary. Did I understand that Meals on Wheels is just 2 days per week? Is that a funding issue or a volunteer need? Why is it just 2 days is the question.
Great question. Thank you, Deb. Actually, several years ago, we transitioned from, you may remember, Meals on Wheels, and we were actually cooking the meals at our meal sites. That's no longer the case. We have since partnered with a vendor. The meals are flash frozen, and even though delivery of these meals is just down to 2 days a week, they do receive a week's worth of meals during that time period. And certainly funding was a very important aspect of reducing that and costs. The cost of getting the meals out there. So hopefully that answers your questions. But even though they are just delivering twice a week, they do get a full meals if that's what they so choose.
Thank you. And Lise has a question. She's involved with youth groups, high school age and middle school age. And she was saying before she starts looking at the many links that Nancy Kroll has kindly posted in our chat here, she wanted to just ask specifically, do you have some suggestions about volunteer opportunities that would be appropriate for middle school age group and high school age group? And that's something that any of the panelists could answer.
Sure, I'll jump in on that one. This is Mike. I'll also post 2 different links in the chat in response to that question. I would recommend DoSomething.org or YouthServeAmerica.org. Both of the websites, both of those are organizations that are specifically designed for K-12 students to engage in volunteerism and promote a variety of volunteer activities. Both of those sites also include, right now, a significant focus on remote or virtual volunteering opportunities. And I also want to just remind folks that volunteering, we think of it as often sort of direct service, client service, but there's other forms of volunteering as well. One of the things that is really compelling for youth is to actually have them raise or even give them some funds and then ask them to become philanthropists, to help them create or to add money in support of issues that they're very concerned about. And then advocacy is another really easy thing to do remotely, where students or children can learn about a particular issue, whether it's climate change or something that they're already passionate about, and then they can write letters, send emails, create videos, do a wide variety of activities that you can do remotely as a way of promoting involvement or providing education in those causes. And so those are all great things to do. But again, DoSomething.org and YouthServeAmerica.org are really good places to plant your flag if you're looking for activities that kids can be charged up about. YSA also has a really great set of curricular guides that you can use with teachers or as after school programs or even as a homeschool parent or group to help actually connect curricular outcomes to service activities, so that students are doing what's called service learning, where they actually learn their academic content as they do service. So it's not something separate from school, it's actually something where they learn by doing and get credit for it in school.
That's awesome.
I was just going to add to follow up, because I think those are both great sites. And thank you, Michael, for bringing those up, because I'm not sure they would have come top of mind, but I've seen both of them and they are great. I just wanted to, when you mentioned something about recording different things, like that's a great thing. That's something that something to do with like advocacy through social media or recording. We've been asking volunteers to record themselves doing some sort of, we had talked about, we started off with a STEM activity, and then we started doing reading, and we got caught up in some of the approval from some of the publishers for the reading. So then we started talking about just like things that you like to do. Like if you like to go for a walk in the woods, like do a recording of where you are and walk in the woods and you see, the geese, what kind of geese are you looking at, or talk about things that you like to do. Do you like to juggle? Well, here's how you start to juggle if you don't know how. Like different things like that they probably don't even think about, but could be really fun for parents who are trying to find something for their kids to do, for teachers who want to pull things down that they might need to, do something new with their classroom or something. Those quick recordings are really helpful.
And I just want to say too, I think reaching out to the age-friendly communities, I believe you mentioned that South Portland's on here. I know South Portland is implementing a snow shoveling program that's so important for older adults, people that are housebound, aren't able to do this on their own. So reaching out to them, and if anyone wants to know the age-friendly, certainly within the community, let us know. But I think that's important. But I also highlighted that I put in the chat howtohelpinmaine.org, which was actually started by some Yarmouth high school students. It's an incredible site if you haven't been on there, and the work that they've been doing, and they're able to coordinate student volunteers with opportunities.
That's awesome. Kathy,
I was just going to say that that also the age-friendly communities helps address one of the other questions from Elise around isolation. Many of the age-friendly communities, and there's sprinkled throughout Maine, have initiatives to help connect individuals that don't have access to the internet or have some discomfort. There's also a digital literacy project through Axiom, which is and I've forgotten who's helping them sponsor it in Southern Maine off the top of my head, but they have a whole digital literacy outreach and training program for elders that's up and running. And then also, just so people know, many of the local and county emergency management agency personnel keep running tabs on people that are significantly isolated in their communities, especially those that have needs around things like oxygen or other potential emergency challenges, and do engage volunteers to do outreach, whether it's phone calls to help check in on people and other opportunities. So there is a social network in much of Maine that does keep track of people that are isolated, but you're right, there are many services that are accessed in Maine through the internet, and it is a challenge for folks that lack that connectivity.
Thank you. And if people wanted to volunteer to help with some of those established community services that are checking on people personally and keeping tabs on people, how would they, do you have any thoughts about how they would discover some of those programs?
They can contact SMAA. We have a list of the age-friendly. We work with the age-friendly communities alongside them in Cumberland and York counties. That's our area. And so certainly just reaching out to us, we'd be happy to share that with you. Like Michael said, many of these programs do have telephone reassurance within their own community or other ways to be able to engage residents who are isolated during this time. One of the ways that they are also identified is that we may have family members reach out to our agency to say, geez, my mom's been home since March, or, we also have community links, which physicians, if they're concerned about a client or if someone's been in the hospital, we may hear from them. So that's just another way, but certainly, folks that don't have access to the internet, we try to get the word out there as best we can.
Great.
Karen, also just that question about how do you connect. Karen did post, or Nancy, I believe, posted volunteer at unitedwaygp.org. And that is part of the United Way network, the Volunteer Me. If you go to United Ways of Maine, there's links there to, Karen can correct me, but it's, I think, 11 different.
It's 9 now.
Nine
Yeah.
different sites that cover various parts of the state. And each of them has long lists of volunteer opportunities. There are also a variety of other organizations or other agencies that help create. There's volunteermatch.org. There used to be one called All for Good, which is now pointsoflight/engage.org. That is an aggregator that takes volunteer opportunities from all over the country and connects them, and you can search them by zip code. So there are a host of ways to find engagement. I did post also the Maine Service Commission.org website, which is another sort of pathway. It does take a few clicks to get through to different things, but I'll let Karen jump in on the United Way sites, because I think that's the one that feels perhaps most local for many folks.
Yeah, and I think that's the same. You can sort by zip code, you can sort by your interest. If you're looking for a particular agency, you can look on that. And yeah, and like I said, we do also have a posting there just for COVID related things, for opportunities. And if you can't find what you're looking for, then you can probably reach out to any one of us and we can help you, point you in the right direction. So.
Yeah,
that's great.
Those sites are dating sites, right? There's people that want to volunteer, and there's agencies that need volunteers, and that's where they meet. So
yeah.
That's great. Kathy has a question about episodic volunteering. So what are some ways that people can support occasional volunteer needs as opposed to ongoing weekly volunteering? And who would they contact? I'm thinking that some of those opportunities would be on the dating sites that you were just referring to,
Yeah.
Michael. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. The episodic volunteering is often connected with events, right? So people go and they put up a Habitat for Humanity house, or they arrive to a day of caring and they renovate a park, or they help the school by painting the library, or and those opportunities certainly do appear on these on the Volunteer Me sites. There's actually a whole classification called events, which organizations can post in addition to ongoing volunteer opportunities. And I think that volunteer managers are more conscious now of the desire of many people to do episodic volunteering. And it is highly valued. It's a little bit of a challenge during COVID because we have less of those in-person events, like the bike-a-thons and the Dempsey Challenge and things like that. But those organizations still need support. So it's worth following up on episodic opportunities, or with the organizations that you may have connected with in the past, and seeing what they need, because lots of organizations do have possibilities for remote volunteering, and there actually are lots of new virtual volunteer opportunities out there. So someone, I think Anne mentioned this idea about, do people need volunteers to read? And there definitely are needs for that. Lots of school districts are looking for ways to relieve elementary school teachers who are teaching remotely by having students have opportunities to plug in to someone who's reading them a story the way that would happen in class. Certainly the AmeriCorps Seniors Program Foster Grandparents, which is sponsored by Opportunity Alliance in the greater Portland area, York and Cumberland counties, has some of those opportunities. But other organizations, certainly the literacy volunteer organizations, are also doing some remote volunteering as well.
Yeah, and I would also say, in addition to those, Boys and Girls Club often has episodic. And also you maybe on the newsletters that we do, the monthly newsletter, so often there are episodic opportunities in there that people can do. And I think that, I think as we get a little further into this, like I said, I think people are still trying to figure out what's coming next. And so people looked at what they, typically did in the spring and what they've typically done in the, summer, and now we're coming into the fall. So I think you might see, some more of those kind of coming up as well for episodic. And I also think if there's an organization that you have an interest in, call and talk to their volunteer coordinator, because sometimes they're looking for new ideas, or you have a skill that they don't even know they need until they're like, oh yeah, I didn't know you had that skill. Maybe you could work on such and such a project. So it's worth a conversation if there's a specific organization that you're looking for or hoping to volunteer with.
That's great. James has a question about what the term age-friendly organization means.
Or maybe Mary, the age-friendly communities like in South Portland, and maybe Nancy also knows what they're working on in Scarborough.
Age-friendly communities is an initiative of the oh, help me somebody, AARP. Oh my goodness, I'm obviously a member. AARP, and it's a national initiative, but it is taking root and becoming much more prevalent in Maine, and it represents an initiative by community to identify all of the things in your community, from your social services to your businesses, your events and access that will make seniors comfortable in their community. So Portland has been a very early adopter of age-friendly communities. There are a number. We do have one in Scarborough now. There's a whole steering committee. I think South Portland has one. I'm not sure I'm pretty sure they are calling it age friendly, but it's an endorsement by the AARP, and you can go into age friendly communities on the AARP website, and there's an extremely detailed profile for every service within your community. The goal is for you to have businesses that people can get a wheelchair into and actually get into the restroom, that there are recreational activities that people find enjoyable and approachable and affordable, walking trails, recreation. So there's just it's a huge range of topics, but to get identified as an age-friendly community, there's an application process that's pretty comprehensive. And so it's a big deal for a community to be called an age-friendly community now. It's a multi-page application. And there's sometimes some funding involved in helping people make those transitions, but generally it's a philosophy. A community is adopting the philosophy to become age-friendly. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Great, thank you. And Elise has a question for our panelists. We have many great agencies and groups in the state, and she's wondering if there are any gaps that communities, towns could do to help with. So she wants to know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And interestingly, the Commission is in the process of doing its strategic plan, which is something we do every 3 years. And part of that is looking at compelling needs across the state that can be met by volunteers. And there's a host of them. Right now, I guess I would say in that health and individual support area, there are 4 that are perennial favorites that have particular challenges right now. Food insecurity has definitely been a significantly it has been a problem for quite a while in Maine. There's been a number of reports about it, but the COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated that, and food insecurity is an area in which there's a great deal of need. Aging in place, the reason that age-friendly communities are popping up is because we do have the oldest population in the country, and there are a variety of needs that folks have in terms of being able to age, not necessarily in place, which is a phrase that is somewhat challenging, but age where people want to age, whether that's staying in their homes and getting supports that can allow them to do that, or being able to find places and in communities that support folks that have perhaps greater needs than they did when they were younger. Affordable housing has been a problem in Maine for a great deal of time, again, exacerbated by COVID. Another one that's been greatly exacerbated by COVID is the opioid crisis. And that's an area in which there are volunteer opportunities. There are a number of organizations in the state that help volunteers become recovery coaches, which is an expanding area of supports for individuals that are in somewhat fragile new recovery. And so those are volunteer opportunities that are available. And then an underlying challenge in Maine that is often met by volunteers through the CAP agencies is transportation, and it gets at all of those other challenges. And certainly COVID has thrown a wrench into much of this supported transportation. It's not so much public transportation, which is only available in a few communities in Maine, but it is for individuals that otherwise lack access to transportation, and is often provided by volunteer drivers around the state. So that's an area which there's great need as well.
That's great. Thank you. Anne had a question about whether there are initiatives that are addressing housing and eviction concerns where people could volunteer. Is anybody aware of specific ones?
I'm not aware of volunteer initiatives around that, but there is certainly some supports on the governor's Keep Maine Healthy website for folks that have I think there's a direct link from that site for folks that are struggling with that challenge.
Yeah, I'm not aware of specific volunteer opportunities either, but I would probably check out Preble Street and see what their thoughts are. I imagine some advocacy opportunities exist with that.
Certainly.
So it's
And
worth
if they're,
a look.
yeah, if they're older adults, legal services for the elderly certainly would be able to help support these older adults that may be facing eviction.
Might be a good time to put a plug in for 211 Maine.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody want to take that one up?
Well, they also need volunteers. I mean, it's a great place to go to get information about opportunities, but it's another area that was very hard hit by COVID in terms of having to develop new ways of delivering service. I mean, 211 does host a number of volunteers. They have some opportunities posted on the mainready.org disaster platform, and on the other volunteer platforms as well. And so both encourage folks to reach out to them and think about volunteering, but also just keep in mind that if you run into a challenge or you want to know more about a service or even volunteer opportunities, 211 is a great place to start.
Yeah, goes both ways.
I'm going to post a link to the Southern Maine Community Organizations Active in Disaster. We've worked with Michael on this. The Scarborough Public Library is a member of Southern Maine COAD. That's the acronym. And we would be deployed to assist with volunteer coordination following a disaster. And we actually meet virtually at this point. Typically, we do meet at the Scarborough Library in what we call blue sky time, but we do have a meeting coming up this coming Wednesday. It's a virtual meeting from 9 to 11, and it's a Google meetup, which operates very similar to Zoom, so don't be uncomfortable about a different platform. And if you're at all interested in joining our meeting, it is a membership meeting, and we're going to be talking more about planning a virtual volunteer reception center. Typically, we learn how to do it in a big room with lots of stations to walk people through, to give them an assignment for a volunteer duty following a disaster. But we've got new platforms in quotes now, and Michael is our guru on our new volunteer reception center platform. And we're going to teach ourselves more about how that works, what it would look like following a disaster to process 200,000, no, we'll say 2,000. Let's go through 2,000 volunteers.
I don't want that big a disaster.
No, please, no, yes, that would be a New York City kind of thing. But processing a lot of volunteers who are well-meaning and show up and need someplace to be, and that whole process of coordinating volunteers is a big part of emergency response. So if anybody's interested, please contact me at the Scarborough Public Library, and I'll be sure you get the link to the meeting. Again, it's Wednesday morning from 9 to 11. And we'd love to have you and have you learn more about Southern Maine COAD, which covers York and Cumberland County.
I do also want to touch on Jean or Jean, depends on where in Maine I guess they're from. Jean's question about volunteering and playing music, which I think is a wonderful volunteer opportunity that apparently she's been, or he has been taking part in by playing music for residents at assisted living facilities and nursing homes. Certainly that is a high risk activity during COVID. And so what are the alternatives? And I would say that there are a couple of different opportunities there. One is I encourage you to reach out directly to those same institutions that you traditionally played at and talk to them about whether there are opportunities for you to Zoom in or to get your group together to record a video session. Tools like Zoom are very inexpensive. $14, I think, is the monthly cost for a Zoom license. And there's even a free platform, although it limits the amount of time. And you could do some shared rehearsal with your group and then record. It's got a free record opportunity. And then those could be shared with those same organizations. And then in the larger scheme of things, arts organizations are among those that are the most in need right now because their revenue source has been cut off by COVID. And so one opportunity is to reach out to those arts organizations and ask whether they have opportunities to participate in participatory art or other opportunities where you could provide some assistance as a volunteer, either remotely or sometimes even in person at these organizations, because many of them are very much desperate right now, given their lack of revenue caused by shutdowns.
So that was one of those ones that I was saying it might be worth a phone call to the volunteer coordinator, because it's probably not something that you're going to find posted, although you might. But if you had that opportunity and you wanted to do something, I think it's definitely worth a phone call, because I think Michael had a great idea to do it via Zoom. In fact, when you said that, I was like, "Ooh, you could do it via Zoom, and then if you want, or you could do it outside, and you could have people out there, or you could watch the process. Like they could watch the process of all of your, all of your practices, and they could see like week to week how you've done it, and then you could invite them to join and sing with you or something." I got very excited when you started talking about that.
Another way too is that we actually use this as a form of recognition. One of the local high schools had put together a concert, and so we're able to share that with all of our volunteers in the form of recognition. And I know that they were really appreciative of receiving that.
Yeah.
It's a great chance for people who are of a certain age to get involved with TikTok.
Oh boy.
Which is what you could do with those high school students. They could teach the people of a certain age how to get involved with TikTok.
Right.
My goodness. Well, it looks like many of the questions have been answered already. It's about 7:45 now. I wanted to invite any last questions for our panelists. Any follow-ups from anyone? This has been highly educational. There are so many links to share, and we will be sharing the recording of tonight with all the participants, and we will also pull out these links and create a resource sheet for people so that they can benefit. And there are people who are definitely saying thank you in the chat. Lots of thanks. You all have been a wonderful panel. We were so lucky to be able to get you. And this is the second to the last program in our community read. And I want to invite you all to the next one, which Catherine is going to explain a little more. But does anybody? I think we may have exhausted all of the questions. You've had some really wonderful answers. So, Catherine, why don't you tell us about the next program?
Well, I just want to add my thanks to our panelists for a really great discussion, and I hope it inspires a lot of people to get out there and volunteer. And our final program in our community read is coming up on Wednesday evening, November 18th at 7 p.m. on Zoom as well. The author of This Is Chance, John Muallim, will be back online to talk to us about his book again. A lot of you have taken the book out over the last couple of months and had a chance to read it, and did some of the book discussions with your neighbors, and maybe even got to chat with the Anchorage librarians up at the public library up in Alaska, who did a couple of programs with us. So this is your last opportunity to get together and to discuss this book. This is Chance. So again, that's November 18th at 7 p.m. I've included the registration link in the chat box, or you can just go to our website or the Thomas Memorial Library or South Portland Public Library to register. And I also just want to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues at those two libraries. We've had a really great time doing all these wonderful programs and getting to know each other and getting to know each other's communities. So thank you to those of you on the call right now. So I hope to see everyone back on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you
Yeah.
all for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.